This is Ainsley Keller. I manage our sales and operations for SK Global's North American division. I am so grateful that you are a part of our summer webinar series. If this is your first one, welcome. If you have been a serial attender, we're so welcome to have you back. So grateful that you are spending your afternoon with us. Chuck Schrader, can you introduce us so I know they can hear you?
Hi there, I am Chuck Schrader. I'm a Senior Solution Architect at SK Global.
All right, so you can hear us. I'm gonna start clicking through some slides. So if you're new here, we have been running this webinar series since mid-May. Almost every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, we have a new event on a new topic, and we bounce around between serving adding value for the accounts receivable side of the teams, to the cash team, to your AP group, and all across your finance division. So about every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, we've kept this slide up to kind of show you the different topics that we've been presenting since May 14th. And of course, today we're focusing on accounts receivable cash application. So if that's what you want to see, you are at the right place. August 27th, we're going to be featuring one of the premier partners in the Microsoft channel, Flint Fox. And then September, we're going to come back and do 3 more episodes in the summer webinar series. If you would like to see any of the recordings of our past events, or you'd like to register for any of our future events, you can go to sksoft.com/events, or you can just go to our homepage and there's a blue banner at the top. You can click on that and see everything from the past on demand, and of course register to attend any of our future events. If you have any questions today, we'll have plenty of time at the end of the webinar where Chuck will review questions, and all you have to do is in the Zoom webinar tool, you can either send us a chat message or use the QA tool that you probably see at the bottom of your Zoom session right now. You can post questions throughout, and then we'll save them to the end and throw them out at Chuck. If you have any questions after today's event closes down, or you forward this webinar and anybody has any comments or questions, you can email those to sales@sksoft.com. If you're new to us totally and you've never heard of SK Global Software, we are a Microsoft Dynamics Global Strategic ISV. We have been in business almost 25 years, and we are a Dynamics only shop. So the code that Chuck is going to present to you today, it is available on the older version of Microsoft Dynamics AX, so AX 2012, which is the on-prem solution. And of course, Microsoft D365 for finance and operations. So it's compatible and available on the latest version of Microsoft D365. And we sell through the Microsoft channel, and we sell through the Microsoft partners. So we are an award-winning organization and very lucky to have a strong customer list today.
It's a big bet for Paramount.
I don't know if we're getting some background noise.
Yeah, there's probably going to be a summit too. So it's probably one of the most ultimate success.
I was muted, so I wonder if Kelly, do you have something
maybe on? I think I muted her. There we go. Okay. Let's click through here. And so we have one more slide and then we're going to get started. Let's see if you can see that. Okay, so the banking and treasury automation suite that most of you know us for, this slide kind of shows the stack of many of the solutions that we offer today. We don't have time to go through them all. We have plenty of webinars and content that are published out on our website to review them. But if you're new to who SK Global is, we offer a full feature-rich solution that's embedded in your D365 or AX environment. And our goal is to automate your daily banking processes, to make those as stress-free and streamlined as possible. And while we sell bank reconciliation, we have things for your AP team around automating and securing vendor payments. We have some treasury solutions. Many of you know that we've also, for the past few years, have represented Sign Up Software and their AP automation product. but today the attention is just for the folks in the AR team. So even within this center silo here, we call customer payment automation, we've got solutions around direct debit. If you're lucky enough to actually send a file to your bank and have funds directly pulled from your customer accounts, we've got a solution for you. And then we also offer a bill presentment and payment portal we call ePay. And as many of you know, we have embedded credit card processing that integrates directly with Dynamics AX and D365. And we support many of the credit card gateways around the world. So we've got a lot going on in the customer payment automation silo that you see there in the center. But today, Chuck's time is going to focus on cash application. When you've been paid by your customers, what's the easiest way to apply those payments to customer invoices, get that cash into your system. And so if you're looking for a better way to automate that, streamline it, support some of your short pays and deductions and things like that, today is your day. So Chuck, that's what I've got to share, and I'm gonna stop sharing and send it over your way.
Alrighty. So hopefully we can see my screen now, Ainsley.
I can see your screen, sir.
D365.
Looks good.
All right. So as Ainsley said, we're talking about cash application today, bringing in payment files and trying to apply cash more efficiently than bringing up a payment journal and clicking off, invoices. So since we're bringing in a file, we first need to kind of know what that file looks like. So we have a lot of the kind of common formats that payment files would come in. And one of the things that kind of along with the format screen is that I think this is really one of the more underutilized products that we have, in that people will say, I don't have a lockbox, so this doesn't really apply to me. But you'll see here that we can bring in formats that are EDI formats. We can bring in comma delimited formats. So there's many applications for this beyond just kind of a true lockbox scenario. In fact, a lot of the banks, the major banks, and we see this with many of our customers in the US and Canada, they will typically they can fold in incoming electronic payments into a file that looks, for lack of a better term, like kind of a lockbox file. In Europe, they use a CAMT50 format to do the sort of the same thing. They're basically peeling it off those electronic payments that come in on your bank statement, and they are making those look like a payment file that we can process with this application. So it's, how did they say it? Not just for lockbox anymore. So, so you can see the formats we have here. I mentioned a couple. The BEI2 it's not the bank rec BEI2. There is a payment, a cash application version of BEI2 that banks produce. CAMT54 we see a lot in outside the US, or if someone has a banking relationship that has US and a bunch of international presence, they might consolidate on a CAMT54. Wells Fargo has a couple of their own formats, and again, with some of the EDI formats we can import as well. Even banks that will give you just a payment dump of maybe a check scanner or something like that, they can a lot of times produce like a CSV file, and we have a mapper to do with the CSV file. Unlike, if you're familiar with the bank rec BEI2, unlike the bank rec BEI2, the cash application BEI2 has a lot less standardization from bank to bank. So we do have a mapper in here that kind of lets you lay out, what exactly yours look like. So if the bank has a slightly different implementation than another bank, again, we have the mapper for that. It's not like the bank rec BEI2 where it's a very rigid a format. But what we set up in here is this is the files coming in. What types of payment files are we getting in? And again, in some cases we do the mapping. Other cases the mapping is kind of fixed based on the format. This screen also, though, is used for laying out mappings for a particular remit information. So what we see a lot in cash application now is that the payment the remit information is getting separated from the payment. So the payment comes into your bank, but there's very little remit, for instance, on a standard ACH type of payment. But I'll separately get a remit advice from my customer that explains this is what this large payment is for. So we can define a separate format for a particular customer. If we have, maybe some of the big box stores are our customers, we could maybe define a format just for that store and or just for that customer and import those separately. And I'll show how we can do that with or without defining a format. If you have one of those relationships where you get, a consistent payment from, again, the big box stores or a big company that pays for tens or hundreds of invoices, it might be worth setting up one of these formats to say what this file looks like. So in this case, I set up one for Walmart, and I just kind of did a quick example that said, these first 4 lines I really don't want. I don't really care about the date when I'm looking at just the remit information. I just care about the invoice and amount. So again, I tell it I don't want the first 4 lines. There's implied decimals in there in a CSV file, and I don't care about the first column, but the last couple. So I did a very simple one, but again, there's a lot of things you can kind of either bring in from a PDF or bring in from a CSV and kind of get into that format. And I'll show you another way that we can kind of look at those things as well, if you kind of have one-off things that are not a consistent remit from a customer. So first of all, we go in here and we define this. We can do a batch split. So if you get large files in that have maybe hundreds of payments, and you want multiple operators working on things at the same time, we can split the incoming file either by count, or if there's an internal batch identifier. A lot of the BA2 files have that in them, so we can split by batch identifier or a payment count as well. So once we know what the file looks like, then we want to say, okay, how do we want to kind of process this? What rules do we have for processing these files? So let me go to the matching rules first. So if I go to the matching rules, a lot of times a customer will remit invoice. That's very common, that they will remit invoice numbers and saying this is what we're paying for. But we also know a lot of industries don't really communicate by invoice numbers, by maybe so much as sales order numbers or requisition numbers or other identifiers. So we have quite a few identifiers here that we can use to kind of find invoices if your customers don't refer to invoice numbers on their payments. In addition, if the customer, all we're getting in is payment information and not getting any remit information, there's ways we can identify the customer from that payment information. So name is one. The other common one is if you're getting a feed from a bank that's from one of those electronic payment feeds, typically it'll include a routing and account number if it's a check scanner, or it'll include just an account number. So sometimes we can recognize the customer just by routing an account. So if the same customer pays from the same checking account, week after week, then, or month after month, the first time you'd associate, the first time that routing account number comes in, it might be unknown. You tell the workbench where that payment's coming from, who the customer is. The next time that same routing account number comes in, we would try to associate it with that customer. Again, that's typically when there's not remit information present. If there is remit information present, the invoice number or whatever remit information there is usually a much better way to find the right customer. But if we can find the customer without invoice information, we can match on things like customer and invoice amount. So did the payment exactly equal one of this customer's open invoices, with or without discount, with or without a tolerance? Also, does this customer payment amount match their total open balance? So again, we can kind of check that with or without discount. But this is a very typical one where we'd say, okay, we want to make sure that if there is remit, we check first if it's an invoice number, then we check if it's a sales order number. Now we're going to see if this payment, that didn't work. And it kind of steps through these and says, I'm going to check if a specific invoice or a total balance works for this customer. So when the lines come in, it runs through these rules, tries to apply the rules as best as can to try to get as much automated matching as possible. The remit text is looking through loose text, so unstructured text. So if I have a comma delimited list, that's maybe part of this file coming in. Again, if you're getting kind of like where the bank's peeling it off of a incoming payment file or incoming electronic payment and submitting something to you, it might be giving you kind of a list of invoices or a bunch of text where somewhere in there the invoice number's at. So remit text data can kind of look through that loose text and try to determine what is invoice numbers. This also gets used in the workbench process itself, where if I have an email, and I'll kind of show that process, how that gets used. I have an email that comes in that explains what this payment that hit my bank account is for. I can kind of marry those two pieces back together in the workbench. So that's kind of the main two pieces there of getting that set up. The last kind of major step to getting it set up is making sure that we have this associated to bank accounts. So we go in and tell it that this particular bank account has a lockbox processing, and this is where the files get dropped if it's an automated drop or it's a manual drop, and these are the rules and the journals that we use to process this. So we got some rules set up, we got a format set up, we know where the files are coming in. We can have a batch job that's going through and automatically importing those files if it's an automated drop that's occurring during the middle of the night. If it's a file that I'm just setting in a folder somewhere, I can click the import button and bring this file in. So I'm just going to bring this file in. So it immediately gives me some feedback as to what's in the batch, and you know, if anything went to the errors or not that we couldn't figure out, even the customer. And hopefully if the bank is reporting a total, some formats report totals, some don't. If they do, hopefully the count that we came up with and the count the bank came up with are the same. Some banks, some formats like CSV formats typically don't report a bank total. But I bring this in, and the workbench is kind of where I try to sort this all out, what worked, what didn't, and how can I get the things that didn't work sorted out quickly. So a couple of things we'll notice, there's kind of a split here in the middle, and for lack of better terms, I'll call it kind of good grid, bad grid. So good grid is things we could at least figure out the customer, we may or may not have been able to apply to an invoice. The error grid is things that came in and either had a customer error or an invoice error. So if something's in this grid, one of these two boxes should always be filled in with some kind of a note that says why it's in this situation. So in this case, Walmart come in, it was duplicate customer. So I'll go and pick a customer here and get the Walmart customer. So now I've got this customer. I still don't have any invoice information, but that's okay. We'll solve that one in a little bit. There we go. So now we have everything in the good grid. You can see that some of these things look good, some of them don't look so good. So the settlement file, I have everything settled for these ones that automatically brought up here. The one thing we might notice here is that there's a split payment indicator on these, and you can see it's the same payment reference number on both lines. It's very common that for a lot of our clients that a parent or higher entity would pay for a bunch of subsidiary type of entities pay on their behalf. So they'll remit a single payment for 400 invoices, and you know, some of them are for one of our invoice customers, others are for a different invoice customers. So in this case, they submitted something. We could tell by the invoice numbers in the remit that this payment needed to be split. On import, I didn't really need to do anything extra for that. On import, it split those payments into separate lines based on how the invoice settlement was divided out. These were just simple invoice settlements that worked. Again, if the invoice number was mistyped by them or not known or was already settled, it would be in that same error grid with an invoice note in it. In this case, though, Walmart brought in a payment. Again, typically a big box store is not going to send all that remit information in. They might send just a check or just a wire payment or ACH payment to your bank account, but the remit information a lot of times is emailed separately. So in this case, I have this Walmart payment in. I don't have any settlement information. It's giving me a visual indicator here that something's wrong. Also, this unsettled amount is 0. There is an option to tell me, to tell the import to say, I really want to only see these type of things in the grid. Anything that worked perfectly, I just want to put to a whole different batch. So it can separate out the things that worked perfectly to a separate batch, so you're only dealing with the exceptions here. For demo, I kind of brought everything in just so I could kind of show the things that did work as well. So there's a couple things I'm typically looking for when I get a payment in. First of all, unless I expect prepayments, I usually expect that the payments I get in are being fully consumed. So the payment I got in, fully settled, fully consumed, the invoices I've used, fully consumed the payment amount. So that's with all these. The second is if that payment did apply to an invoice, the invoices it paid should be fully used as well, fully paid off. So this other checkbox down here is showing me that this was a full settlement. This is a no settlement now, but there's also the different indicators for partial settlements or maybe settlements that can settle with a tolerance. I'll just mention that now as well. If you do set up the penny difference parameters in AR parameters, so if it's 2 cents or 5 cents or $5, and you can set those up in standard AR parameters, we will honor that tolerance and settle with tolerance as well. So in this case, this settled nothing. We got the settlement information in separately. So I'm going to go to the settlement screen, and there's a couple things I can do from here. I could load open transactions, and in this case, it would look a lot like the standard AR payment journal settlement screen. So I'd go down and check full settlement or change the settlement amount for any individual lines. Again, much like the payment journal screen. That wouldn't really add a lot of automation, but maybe, if I know this was just settling a single invoice, that might still be the quickest way to go about it. If I did set up a format and I set up and I know this person always sends me the same kind of CSV file every week or the same Excel file every week, I could set up a format, browse out to that file, import it in here, and have it fill out the screen for me based on that settlement file. Again, I'd probably do that in cases where I get a consistent file from a big customer or a customer that settles lots of invoices. But there's also a third way that for the one-off emails I got or whatever that I can use as well. So we have this remit text analysis. So it brings up a blank box. I could paste from I could paste from an email. I could paste from a PDF as long as I'm grabbing like the text, not a picture. Or in this case, I'm just pasting from Excel spreadsheet. It's the same one I could have read in structured in this case, but just showing kind of a different way. So let me make that big again. So try to paste this in. So I didn't even do a very clean paste. I didn't get just invoice numbers and amounts. I got kind of garbage above and below it there. But I click analyze, and it's sorting through, finding those invoice numbers. I clicked kind of quick there, but if you notice, those were partial invoice numbers in there, and it kind of filled out this grid for me. So in this case, Walmart short paid us a little bit, but again, we have customers that use that to paste in tens or hundreds of invoices and again, very, very quickly fill out this screen and get it very, very close. So if in this case, they short paid, I can in this screen just simply write this off. If I want to put in a write-off here, I could put in a write-off. But now we've also kind of added some ties to the deduction screen. So if I want to do a straightforward write-off, I could do it here. And it would quickly just create a free text invoice and bring me back to the screen with that free text invoice checked. So if I wanted to write off this $5, I could do it that way. In the last year or so, we've added a deduction tie-in as well. So I'll just show you that way as well. By the way, if there's people that are attending today that are familiar with our product from maybe AX 2012 or even very early versions of D365, or maybe it was AX7 when that was there, that remit text analysis was not there in those versions, and it is in D365 now. Even for clients that use like the import settlement details and some of those functions before, this remit text analysis has saved them a lot of time in dealing with those situations where the remitted advice is separated from the payment. So I'm going to close this screen. We're still out a little bit here. So I'm going to show the deduction functionality. So in this case, we have a deduction. I'm going to just make a new one here for $5 and click save and exit. I don't think I would have had to click save there, I guess. So now I have this $5 deduction. I have still an unsettled amount, but they're offsetting here. But this journal, this workbench is ready to go to payment journal. So I have net, no settlements, nothing unsettled, and the rest of things settled fine when they were imported. So I'm going to go ahead and create the payment journal. If I want to go ahead and click the payment journal here, if I do split these out into multiple batches because I want multiple operators, I get hundreds of payments in or whatever, I can split them out. This is where I would kind of put them back in. If I want to put the deposit back together, I would add them back into an existing journal to kind of put those batches back together into a single deposit. In this case, I'm just going to create a new journal. Yep, we know we got that unsettled amount in there. So I created a journal. There is a navigation button to go straight from the journal over from here. So I can click the payment journal button. This is the journal that got created. So if I go into the lines on this journal, hopefully we see that this looks very similar to the screen I just came from. So in the case of single invoices, they're here. In the case of the ones settling multiple invoices, just like you would expect, it filled out the screen and checked off the right items. So nope, we don't want to change that. So the whole idea of the workbench is to try to get you to this clean payment journal much more quickly than entering payments by hand in the payment journal. The deductions, I didn't post this one. I posted one earlier though to save a little time here. So let me go back to that. But for those not familiar with the deductions, if you post one of those deductions, it becomes part of the standard Microsoft deduction workbench. So then you can go into deduction workbench, pick these. You can see I did posted a couple of those earlier, but I could go in there and kind of choose one by one what to do with that. So by entering a deduction, it allows me to kind of quickly balance that payment and pay off the invoice. But then someone can come back in here later, maybe a supervisory type of role, and decide individually to allow or not allow. So if I deny these, it's really going to put the balance back on the customer as a receivable. If I write it off, it's going to let it be written off. And if you have maybe a big write-off, you might choose to allow some and not allow others. Again, this is standard Microsoft screen here, but our workbench, by calling something a deduction, will feed into this standard process. So back up here. I'll just point out a couple of kind of more minor things in the workbench itself that some of our customers use. And we'll bring it up here, show completed. So there is a review process. So if I go to the review screen, again, this is a done one, so I really can't do that, but I could, if I wanted to maybe write this off, but I wanted somebody to look at it first, I could say, needs reviewed and pick a person to assign to here. That person's view into the screen would be limited to things that they are marked for as the reviewer, and they really can't change things. The reviewer can't change things on the screen other than to add notes. and view everything about it, but they can't really change things on the screen. So the typical scenario there is I'd send it to a reviewer, the reviewer would add some notes, assign it back to me, and I'd come in and then complete this workbench. So we have folks that use that as well. There are a lot of options. We try to make this very configurable so that it doesn't have to be customizable, but there are options that, for instance, if you have customers that pay the same invoice multiple times with the same payment. So we have customers of ours that have customers that they will send an invoice out. That customer decides to split it between multiple departments, so they'll remit back the whole invoice on a single payment, but they'll have the same invoice number referenced multiple times. Well, you know, in D365, you'll get the already marked for settlement error, but we have options to say, hey, do we really want to kind of roll that back up into the same invoice so we don't get, you know, that we're trying to mark the same invoice multiple times. So the other one is, you see the dimensions on here, is where do you want us to derive payments dimensions from? Do you want us to derive it from the invoice, from the customer, from the overall journal that this is assigned to? So again, there's options there. And one of the options I already mentioned, when you load this in the first place, you can choose to split all of these things that worked perfectly out so that I'm only looking at the things that need some attention, either something that the payment didn't get fully consumed and or the things where the invoice didn't get fully settled. So again, there's lots of kind of little switches in there to kind of allow you to tune it the way you want to run your business. When I create that payment journal, do I want it to post? Do I want it to post and create a deposit slip? All those things are tunable with configuration. So one last thing, Ainsley, and we'll get to questions. Write-off. There are customers that in or industries in particular that have a lot of kind of small write-offs that they do as this part of normal business. So we do have a automatic write-off. So if someone takes, I call it an unannounced credit. So I send a bill out and someone just takes a $5 credit. It's not a credit I issued them. We can have what we have call an auto credit, where if that unannounced credit comes in, we can write off that credit. If in this case, I'm saying if it's under $5, just write it off. If it's between 5 and 50, I want to write it off, but I want to automatically create a rebill, an unposted rebill to that customer that someone can review. So these would be kind of just written off and forgotten. These would be reviewable, and anything over that amount would never be automatically written off. So again, doesn't apply in a lot of cases, but for those who get a lot of, you know, $1 to $5 type of credits that a customer is taking, and you're typically allowing those, you can set those up. The one question I get a lot, and I didn't look at the questions yet, is can these things be per customer, the rules be per customer? And the answer is, with the matching rules, no, because a lot of times the rules is how we're figuring out the customer. I mentioned when I was talking about the rules that we use a lot of times the invoice is a more reliable way to find the customer than maybe the customer name or some other customer information we get in. The answer on write-off rules is yes. So on the write-off rules, by the time we're doing a write-off, we know who the customer is. So if Walmart always deducts $2 for everything I send them, and I just want to write that off and not chase it up, I could have a specific write-off rule called Walmart, assign it to just that customer, but yet have this be my default rule for everyone else. So the write-off rules can be assigned per customer. The general matching rules cannot, because we kind of use those to find the customer in the first place. So we got any questions built up? I felt like I did a lot of talking quickly. So.
Yeah, great job, Chuck. Can you go back to the location where you kind of show the different file types that we support? I know we have a webinar coming up where we call it Inside the Bank Consult. If you've been a partner for a while, or you even have purchased our solution and have started to implement, We typically are kicking off projects or supporting our partners in the Microsoft channel with what we call a bank consult. And we kind of dive into this in a little bit more detail. But can you talk a little bit more about the formats here? So in your experience, Chuck, if you're on the phone with a customer and a bank, is there some best practices if they're being charged different fees between a BAI2 or a CSV? Is there any tip or trick there?
Yeah, so we get involved, like Ainsley said, we get involved with a lot of those calls up front. What's the best, what format works best, or what can we get the most value out of the format? And there's a couple things there. CAMT outside the U.S. or I should say outside of North America, and again, as a general rule, we have had customers inside get that as well. And BAI2 across North America, those typically work better because they have a clear distinction between a payment record and a remit record. CSV files, they kind of merge that into one long line, and it can be tougher to tell when information should be split. So there's a couple, for instance, if we detect a split, we will tell you we detect a split, but we'll kind of make you click a button to confirm it on a CSV. We don't do that on a BAI2 because we know, what's being split there. The other thing is when setting up a BAI2, a lot of times there is questions as to how much information to bring in because the banks typically will charge more to provide more information. The information on the payment itself is usually pretty standard, and the banks kind of provide that standardly because they get a quote for free. Scanning the bottom of the check gives us a lot of information, routing, account, check number, and of course the bank has to know the amount to record it in the first place. So routing, account, check number, and amount, those things you kind of get for free. And then a lot of times on the remit information, they want to know how much. And as you saw in that simple Walmart example, getting in just the invoice amount and invoice reference, those two pieces of information gives you, a lot of cash application automatic settlement. So a lot of times the banks will want to include a lot more information in there. Even things like name, if we have routing an account, typically it's more reliable than name anyways, and names tend to have a lot of variance in terms of, do I send it out with INC period and they send it back without the, and we have algorithms kind of try to match it one way and try to match it another, but still a lot of times having a bank, especially if they're charging a lot more to provide like a name, is not worth it.
Can you show us the screen where you have our standard matching rules and kind of talk through how we would know, or how would somebody evaluating the solution know whether they need what I've heard us consider a custom matching rule? What's the requirements around that?
Yep, I'll go back to there. So we will go here to matching rule groups. So yeah, I pointed out some of the types we have. If the invoice, somebody's submitting invoice numbers, and I almost always use the ends with rule. If I'm submitting INV-00567, that could come back as that whole string. It could come back as just 00567, or it could come back as just 567. So I usually use the ends with rule to do the matching because of customers sending back very, very frequently partial invoice numbers, and it's almost always the trailing, significant part that they send back. But again, we go work with you to kind of determine what information are they sending back. Are they sending back invoice numbers, requisition numbers, or whatever. The payment reference, that tends to be a good place if you're bringing in, for instance, we have people that use this to bring in like PayPal payments or something like that, and they already have the invoice generated, and they'll put like an authorization number in the payment reference, so then we can match to that field coming in. So sometimes just with clever integration, the standard rules will work. We've had things though where we do have a custom tie-in, so I won't ruin one of the ones I have here, but if I choose custom, it's going to ask for a custom class to put in. Some of the typical things we had for that was we have our own custom field. We send our customers a product ID, and that's what they reference. So we will have we'll write up a rule to match that custom situation. The other one is we have some sort of an aggregate we want to do where we send out a group ID, and this customer references this group ID for a collection of invoices, and then we can match to that collection of invoices. So a lot of those very specific things like that. We've had ones that want kind of a variation of the write-off rules, and we can really handle these in these custom matching classes. Say, hey, we're going to match based on this, but we can write off the difference automatically as well. So the custom write-off rules can handle a lot of one-off situations. The nice piece about this is the custom, in this case, is kind of built into the framework. So we already have a way to invoke a custom step. This custom step would be something named something specific to you, to your specific company, so we would never override it, or future versions be future proof for upgrades to future versions of our software.
Okay, we have a question from Nancy. Some customers list invoice numbers and sales order numbers on the payment detail. Our sales numbers and invoice numbers look the same. Can the system tell the difference and apply to the right account?
So if the invoice numbers and sales order numbers, that can be tricky. If they're putting in different columns, we can of course map whatever column we want and bring it in that way. Typically the way that's going to show up on Workbench, if it makes a match to the wrong one, first of all, if there's a duplicate, it will tell you there was a duplicate. So if it's an invoice number and a sales order, I mean, we will find it and say there's a duplicate there. And if it's more likely one than the other, you'd put that one first. So in this case, if they most likely reference an invoice number, we'd want to search that first and then sales order. But normally the way that would show up on the Workbench is that column I showed you where it says it was partially settled. If we pick the wrong one, it's a very good chance that the settlement amount is not going to match what they thought the settlement amount would do. So either there would be payment left over, or there would be payment would be fully consumed, and the invoice number would show as partially settled, which would give you a clue that you'd want to look at why that was partially settled.
Okay, if there are any other questions, do we have any other? We've got about another minute. If you think of anything, you all can send an email to sales@sksoft.com. Like I said, if you go to sksoft.com/events, you can see all of our past events and register to view them online, and you can also, or on demand, and then you can register for our future events. I know some of the things that we just talked about with the cash application file formats, that's a little bit of a peek into what Chuck and I will be covering in our bank consult. If you're interested in more of customer payment automation, and you've got issues with deductions and you'd like to learn more about the Flint Fox solution, we will be featuring them as our partner in our next webinar. So you can register for the overview of the Flint Fox solution that's coming up soon. I'm just going to give it one other minute. Deirdre, if you can hear me, you submitted a question. I think Chuck and I will take it offline and get back to you on your product licensing and understanding what requirements you have. We'll give it just another couple seconds and see if anybody else has any other questions. All right, Chuck Schrader, thanks for your time today. Thanks for prepping for this with me. Everyone, thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Most of you know where to find us. So if you have any questions, you can email sales@sksoft.com, and we look forward to seeing you on another one of our installments of the summer webinar series. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.